you might be wondering what this video is about. And to answer that question, I will give you a few insights regarding this video so that you can decide whether you want to continue or not. So throughout this video, I will be answering only 3 questions. Question number 1, prerequisites for the assessment. Question number 2, what happens during the assessment? Question number 3, what happens after the assessment? And when I mention assessment, we're only focusing on the functional safety assessment for the software development. We're not talking about the testing. We're not talking about the system. I mean, why we need a functional safety assessment in the first place? I think the main reason is to understand the gaps. Assessor will go through all the product lifecycle artifacts. He will assess all your artifacts with the functional safety standards, and then he will be able to give you some gaps, which gives you some sort of room to fix them. And so which means we have some room to improve. If everything is fine, you will obviously receive some formal certification that that respective software is compliant with their functional safety standard. So start with the first question. What are the prerequisites for this assessment, right? So first one, you need to make sure all the documents are completed. What I mean was no gaps, and they're up to date, and they're reviewed properly. Next one, we need to discuss all the team members who will be on the assessment day and their roles and responsibilities. Third point, we need to make sure all the tools, or maybe the necessary tools, which are validated according to the ISO 26262 standard. And the last thing, we also need to make sure that the traceability matrix is up to date. And then I think we're ready. Next step is to set the meeting and go ahead. Now, what happens during the assessment? Right? To explain this, I made a small mock presentation so that it will give us some better understanding how it goes. So, functional safety assessment preparation. Now, let's consider one mock assessment for one of our projects here, which is, for example, battery management system, BMS software. Yeah, and throughout this video, we'll be considering few artifacts regarding this BMS project and few questions and responses based on this software. Now, let's look at the participants in the room. First, we have a software development team, and then all the artifacts open. It would be great if you open already. And the assessor, all set. Now we can start the assessment. So usually assessor will take the lead and he will ask the questions, and development team will start responding. He will observe if he sends any gaps, and then he will take a note, and then he will send after the meeting. Yeah. Now we reach to the main event. Assessor, as I mentioned, assessor will take the stage and he will start ask the questions. And what kind of questions he will ask? Let's look at a few examples. Now, assessor will ask you to open the safety requirement specification. Then he will start asking some random questions. For example, show me the safety requirements for the BMS. Then a colleague will start presenting the document and showing the requirements. For example, we trigger the cooling mechanism if the temperature exceeds a certain threshold, right? And he might also show you one more example saying that, we will shut down if the state of charge drops below critical value. And don't expect he will ask any specific questions. No, he will ask very random questions. For example, when I say a trigger cooling mechanism, then he will ask when you trigger and how much time you take to trigger this cooling mechanism once the temperature exceeds, and what are the timing constraints you maintain. There's so many random questions which you will encounter. Be prepared. Then architecture design. Usually he will ask you to open some Rhapsody, some other tools, to validate the design. But usually those designs, obviously the architecture will be developed from the requirement. For example, you might ask you how you implemented the diagnosis layer, right? To check the sensor failures and communication errors. And also a few mechanisms like error detection and correction mechanisms to ensure the reliable data transmission between the slave and BMS modules. Yeah. And after that, he will definitely go to the detailed software design to check all the state machine specifically for the application, and sometimes also the base software. And he might check the few important requirements. For example, how the cooling system. Previously, we discussed we triggered the cooling system when the battery temperature crossed the thresholds, and then here he will check the design, how it's been done, and also few periodic checks. Next, he will definitely check FMEA, FTA, failure mode and effect analysis, also the fault tree analysis. So basically, what we're trying to explain here is that we're going to say that this is the calibration and cross-checking mechanisms to ensure that we received the correct temperature readings. Yeah, and so which means we're trying to say that we have if in case we have a failure mechanism and we have a backup plan. So here, I think most importantly, this technical data might be changed between project to project, but what's important to remember is that we have a safety analysis and we have FMEA and FTA. These three things will not change even though the project changes. Maybe it might be a chassis system or maybe some active safety, passive safety. But I believe artifact should not change and will not change. Next one would be the traceability. He will ask you, or maybe he will check the consistency of the traceability across all the artifacts throughout your development cycle. And for example, let me just give you an example. The cooling mechanism requirement should be also linked to the design, also to the code, also to the test cases, or maybe the whole testing environment. Also, it's recommended to establish good environment for the integration and build process to avoid any negative impacts when you have a new software update. Next one, tool qualification report. Here we're going to test, for example, here we're going to test with known defects to check how the respective compiler or maybe respective tool is behaving, so that we'll be able to compare the expected output with the output from the tool. Also the traceability matrix and the interface specifications. And then later of the meeting, maybe within 1 or 2 days, assessor will come back with validated assessment report so that you will get to know if you have any backlogs or maybe gaps, so that they needs to be, or maybe they will be reassessed. What happens after the assessment? So as you expected, we will receive a detailed report with all the findings, and then from the software development side, we have some action plan to fix all the defects. And then once we have all the documents ready with the fixed ones, we will ask for the reassessment. Now let's look at the quick summary.